This conference will now be recorded.
All right, it's 10 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order, the Tampa Bay Estuary Program Policy. Roll call, Ms. Lewis.
Good morning, Chair Justman.
Here.
Commissioner Owen. Jorge Arano for Commissioner Van Silver.
He's here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Here.
Colleen Weaver for Commissioner Mariano. Here. Councilmember Montanari.
Here.
Alex Awad for Councilmember Hurtak.
Here.
Councilmember Beckman. Here. Kelly Boatright. Here. Randy Smith.
Here.
Tom McGill.
Here.
And have a forum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Approval of changes to the agenda. We have one item, 7.1 at your desk that will be added. If there's no objection, there's a motion to approve the final agenda. We have a motion, second? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. Approval of minutes from the August 19th policy board meeting. Are there edits or is there a motion to approve? Moving from second. We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. Do we have any general citizens comments? Seeing none, we'll move on. Discussion items. Item number 4, project highlight Piney Point closure activities. All right, take us away.
Yeah, just to give a little introduction, this is at the request of the policy board at the prior meeting, here an update on the Piney Point facility and where they're at in terms of the closure of that facility. So today we have the court appointed receiver, Mr. Herb Donica, part of the state chief science officer, Dr. Marco Rains, and Mr. John Coates from Florida Department of Environmental Protection, kind of giving an overview of the status of the facility and the future closure plans and operations, especially in light of the current hurricanes and rainy season that we just experienced. With that, we'll turn it over to them and their presentation is starting to get queued up.
All right, so is this microphone live?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity to come speak with you guys today. We really appreciate it. Over the last 3 decades or so, some poor folks have had to come before you and others and tell some sad stories about Piney Point, and we're actually pretty happy to be able to come here today and tell you a happy story about Piney Point, because we continue to move resolutely without any opposition through the final chapter towards closure. And we'll finally be able to put this firmly behind us. Just to introduce ourselves, I'm Mark Rains. I'm a professor of geology at the University of South Florida, also chief science officer for the state of Florida. Because I'm from USF, I'm your neighbor, and I have a personal stake in closure of Piney Point every bit as much as you guys do. And I'll be glad to see this in our rearview mirror. And I'll be even gladder when I can no longer see it there at all. I'm joined by the smart people, though, and you're going to hear from 2 of them here, one after the other. First, John Coates, who's a program administrator at Florida Department of Environmental Protection. He has sort of the dubious distinction, perhaps, of knowing more about the past, present, and future of Piney Point than anyone alive. And nobody will be happier than John will be when this is behind us. He's going to take you through sort of a little bit of the history of how we as a community got to where we are today, and then give us a vision forward where we're going tomorrow. And then he'll hand off to our appointed receiver, Herb Donica, who will tell you a little bit about where we are in that closure process and where we think we'll be in the not too distant future. He'll hand it back to me. I'll wrap it up, and then we'll be happy to take as many questions as you guys have and have time for. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, John, and why don't you take it away?
So thank you, Dr. Rains, and thank you, Ed, for making sure the logistics worked out for us, and appreciate the chance to talk on behalf of the department for the policy board, and their interest here in Tampa Bay. And we really do appreciate the time, the attention. Both the estuary program historically, was very helpful in providing input. And of course, the Agency on Bay Management, where we did a last update on Piney Point. The input that we get matters. What gets accomplished here for Tampa Bay and for the community here in this part of Florida is really, really important to us. So I want to go through and talk, and if I understand correctly, one of the asks was just to talk a little bit, not to go a lot into the history, because what I think we all care about is that this lands well with all the work and activities that the court appointed receiver, that Mr. Domick is doing. But it is important to kind of understand a little bit about how we got here, so we understand that request. And what I would say here is we hope that these two slides, I'll come back here in just a second, we think they provide kind of the big picture. There's a lot of additional information and stuff out there, but this particular facility, the Piney Point facility, was constructed as part of the Manatee County's efforts at that time in the mid-60s to promote growth and development and take care of commerce and the people of Manatee County, and this part of Florida, by constructing a port facility, there on Tampa Bay, by also providing for infrastructure that supported, water and wastewater systems in northern part of Manatee County. And part of those discussions led to the formation and the arrangements for construction of the Borden Chemical Facility across from Port Manatee, in the mid-60s. Became operational, I think, around 1966. And that facility went through, and we have some of the details there, but just suffice it to say that facility went through several ownership changes that ultimately, for the highlights today, I think really led us to the Mulberry Corporation, which took over the site, in the 90s. And by the early 2001, the Mulberry Corporation, who owned Piney Point Phosphates in northern Manatee County, and also owns and operated Mulberry Phosphates in Polk County, that corporation originally filed for reorganization in the early part of 2001 and ultimately abandoned both those sites here in Central Florida. So important milestone, because it was in early 2001 when the department first really deeply became involved in a way to request at that time. EPA initially stepped in and provided some support for work that would need to be done at the site to protect Tampa Bay, speaking specifically about Piney Point. A court-appointed receiver was requested and put in place at that time, and the site itself underwent a large number of construction and closure operations, and those at the time included the construction of the reservoirs that are really the focus of the work today. The reservoirs that were built atop the stack, is customary to build a reservoir to manage and store processed water while you dewater a site like this and do construction. Additional reservoirs were constructed at that site to provide storage or use of that facility for whoever might own and operate that facility in the future. The site was sold by the bankruptcy trustee to HRK in 2006, August of 2006. And so at that time, the department had both contractors, and previously the court-appointed receiver had contractors that had been doing water management, talking with the estuary program at that time, making sure that the water treatment that needed to be done and the work that was done in a way that was protective of the bay, but also getting the site closed. That work was completed in 2010, but it left four large reservoirs atop the gyp stack, which, based on an agreement that HRK, the owner that bought the site in 2006, they entered into an agreement with Port Manatee to be able to put dredge materials in the top of that, in those reservoirs. And during the initial dredging project, which happened in 2011, there was an initial failure that I'm sure many of you all are familiar with the details on that, of that particular compartment. And what was primarily discharged from that site in 2011 was mostly the seawater from the dredging operation. Certainly a concern that changed the dynamics significantly at the site. HRK, as a result of lawsuits, went into bankruptcy protections at that time. And I think the most important thing is that during the next, essentially, let's just say the next 10 years, there were a tremendous number of efforts on the part of the department and stakeholders to make sure the site was being properly cared for. There was a consent order that was issued to require the owner to be accountable for continuing to manage that site. They did emerge in 2017 from their bankruptcy process. The intent was to, one, they had to, of course, continue to manage the daily activities at the site and had to provide for removal of the processed water and seawater mixture that was in those ponds at the site. HRK did not bring forward the resources to be able to accomplish that. The site up through March of 2021 continued to be owned and operated subject to regulatory requirements by HRK Holdings. And of course, in March of 2021 is when HRK notified the department that they had conditions at the site that were certainly problematic, indicating a subsequent, 10 years later, problem in that particular compartment. I glossed over the fact that dredging project back in 2011 was completed. Repairs were made to that facility back and then by HRK. But unfortunately, that problem again led to the emergency discharge that started on March 30th, and the emergency conditions in the state and the actions by the governor and the local county, Manatee County, to take and respond to the site and do everything possible to prevent, worse conditions for Tampa Bay. The emergency discharge was stopped on the 9th, and an awful lot between, say, April and May through August. A lot of additional site activities and repairs were conducted, and the court-appointed receiver was appointed at the request of the department on August.
Can we interrupt you for 1 second? The council question.
I've had a hard time hearing you. I don't know if you could speak into that microphone or not.
Sure.
If it's being recorded, I can go back and re-listen. Is that
Sure.
correct?
Thank you for letting me know.
If what you're saying is really important, I want to make sure.
Sure. Is that any better?
I don't think it's amplifying in the room.
It's just recording for.
Okay, all right, can you just speak a little bit louder?
I will absolutely. Yeah, thank you for letting me know. So what we want to do just for a minute is to talk very high level about the site, about the roles and responsibilities, about the current conditions at the site, and then turn it over really, and Mr. Donica will talk through the kind of activities and the things that he is doing to make sure that indeed this is the final chapter, of Piney Point, that there are no concerns going forward from this site. And we wouldn't be here without the work of Herb and his role as court-appointed receiver, and the work and the support with the county there, with Manatee County. So a lot of the things that are good news today that Dr. Raines was talking about is a lot of hard effort, both the department, by the local community, and by the court-appointed receiver. So from the department's perspective, really our role continues to be regulatory oversight. We have some of the most stringent requirements for these kind of facilities, in the nation, in the country. And we have to make sure that the closure work and the impacts from this latest leak in March of 21 are properly addressed to ultimately protect groundwater and surface water resources. I mean, that really is what ultimately matters from the regulatory oversight, to make sure that this facility is safe and is not a threat to any of our water resources. Our role in working with Herb is to provide support and the funding that has been appropriated. So the governor's office and the legislature have certainly shown their commitment and continue to provide support and funding to do the work that is needed to make this the final chapter for Piney Point. The receiver really, and he'll give you all the details that go with this, but really his responsibilities are, one, to do that expeditious closure of the site, and to take care of the site and manage those day-to-day activities, repairs, maintenance, all the things, the environmental monitoring that have to be done at that site for us all as a community to make sure that the site is not a concern. So planning and implementing the closure, that's the receiver's task, and managing the day-to-day operations and activities at the site is really what the receiver, is working very diligently on every day of the week. Just very briefly about the conditions at the site. So the first thing I would point to, this is a number that I think if everybody continues to watch this number, we update this on the department's website, where we provide information at least weekly on Piney Point. And the rainfall storage capacity at the site is about 25 inches. And so that is in a very good position today. We want to see that number continue to increase. But that is through the work and the ongoing activities at the site to manage the water, to work with Manatee County and their utilities department on a daily discharge to the publicly owned treatment works in Manatee County, to their domestic wastewater system. That water is treated. There's a small volume of water that's discharged, about 100,000 gallons every day from the site. All those activities, spray operations at the site, continue to make the site where it is safer today, as the longer term plans of getting closure construction arranged and completed at the site are done. The inventory at the site, approximately a little over 500 million gallons of a mixture of seawater and processed water in the various compartments. Every day, the site, monitors, each of these compartments' water levels and reports that information to the department. Some of the big milestones that are really, really important here in 2022, the receiver, in working with his engineer, first sat down and put what we would call a conceptual closure plan together. And that is a very important document as it lays the entire roadmap for timing that's expected, as well as how this site will work in its closed condition and all the features that will be built into the closure work. That particular plan then requires, in the department's approval on March 30th of 2022, requires the receiver to provide detailed engineering plans and specifications, which are hundreds of pages for each individual project that will get done. And the first of those is the OGS South compartment at the site. That's the one compartment atop the stack that does not have any processed water involved in it. It really has rainwater over dredge materials at the site. So that is not waiting on the ability to remove processed water in conjunction with the deep well that Manatee County is constructing. So that work was able to go forward, and indeed, as Herb will talk with you about, that work is underway and is moving forward. The plan itself is really important. It builds in, environmental protection requirements. It builds in the process and the timing and the strategy for how this closure work will be done. And then again, it requires that the detailed engineering and design also for each particular phase of closure construction work has to also then come before the department, be reviewed, critiqued, and if it meets all the requirements, then we approve those, and Herb goes forward and works on the next phase of the closure work. Just very briefly, a couple of very high-level items that I think are important and are often questions that the public will ask us about the site. So these are the compartments that were shown in the inventory. So when you're going back and looking at the presentation, the NGS South is the compartment that during the dredging project in 2011 was used to clarify the dredge return water before it went back to Port Manatee. That is the compartment that has had, unfortunately, the two failures in 2011 and 2021. That compartment today, because of the receiver's ongoing work, has important water quality changes that were done by ongoing innovative treatment. The nitrogen and phosphorus levels are around 1 or 2 milligrams per liter or less, depending on whether you're talking about nitrogen or phosphorus in that pond. There's a little bit of organic nitrogen, of course, left in there, but those ongoing treatment operations have addressed the large volume of water in the NGS South and removed the constituents that are really critical to the safety and protection of Tampa Bay, which is the nutrient concentrations that are in the NGS South.
Just to add a little bit more context, so when the breach happened, the concentrations from that stack was around 230 milligrams per liter, so they're much due to the treatment.
Yeah, Ed, thank you. Just a couple of very, very quick, just big picture highlights. The closure plan, the conceptual closure plan will render each of these areas, they total something on the order of 150 acres. So they no longer impound water. Each of the compartments will have notches cut in as part of a closure plan. The closure will include a relining of each of these areas. Whatever drains and infrastructure is needed to manage water in these areas, as well as to create clean stormwater runoff that will be routed and managed so that it does not cause any flooding or water quantity concerns also coming off the site. If you can imagine, you have a site here that has another 150 plus acres of land that have not drained, into the surrounding community. Those areas will need, that stormwater will need to be properly managed for both quality and quantity. And the closure plan is accommodating that to make sure that these areas, again, won't ever hold water again for impoundments. They'll never be able to use like that again, but they will, produce clean, non-contact stormwater runoff that will protect the water quality in the bay. So that is, in essence, the high-level overview of what has to be done here. There's a lot of additional very, very critical details about going back and evaluating the condition of the original closure drains that were built around this facility in the early 2000s. Those were certainly impacted by the leak most recently in 2021. And there is a process that is being put together that will ensure that those drains are properly operating, for example, to protect groundwater in the surrounding areas around the site. So with that, and probably most important, I apologize for being long-winded and hopefully not too soft-spoken. Herb, go through and talk about the receivers activities.
Thank you, Mr. Coates, Dr. Raines. Appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all today to try to bring you up to date as to what's currently going on at the site. I can share some numbers with you that will give you some context. We went under contract with our contractor, Forgin LLC, in August. Since August, we have brought in materials to the site. We have all the materials on hand to complete the construction of Old Gypstack South. That includes pipes, geotextile fabric, and liner material. Also includes large quantities of dirt and sand that will be used to recontour the inside of Old Gypstack South to promote drainage to the west, where the notch will be cut. I think that notch will probably be cut sometime this month or next, so they'll start draining with each rainfall. It's a very important milestone for us. Since August, we have trucks entering the site, approximately 14,000 loads of large dual and triple axle dump trucks. They've delivered almost 250,000 cubic yards of dirt and fill dirt and sand. That's to give you context of how big the project is, how much will be done. That's a lot of movement, and that creates potentially unsafe environment. We have safety meetings every morning. Our contractor have their own meetings every morning. And to give you a context of how good they are, so far, there have been 2 non-reportable minor injuries, 1 bee sting and 1 twisted ankle. That's it. That's 14,000 trucks entering the site, and that's all we have. So I'm very proud of that and very pleased with their response to the work order and how they're conducting themselves. And there are no shortcuts. We have to comply with the Florida Administrative Code and the permits issued by the DEP. So there's no way to do any shortcuts or to hurry up any portion of the project. We're doing it exactly as planned. And we've run into some delays with respect to supply chain issues, weather issues. On the weather issues, we've survived rainy season and 2 glancing blows of hurricanes. So we're still lucky. That's both of those 2 hurricanes are very different, and each of them could have done a lot of damage. We had to scramble to get materials that are laying out in the open and have them secured. We had to use other materials to pin them down so that the geotextile fabric didn't end up somewhere in Polk County. It took a lot of work. It takes about 3 or 4 days each time to get ready for a hurricane, then another couple days to unwind from that, to get back in the groove and continue with construction activities. This is a timeline. People ask me if we're on schedule. Roughly, yes. We are behind a little bit when you have to fight off 2 hurricanes and supply chain issues. But things are going smoothly now. And once we end up, we're completing the rollout of the geotextile material right now. And when that's done, it'll be downhill sledding. There'll be a placement of 6 inches of sand, then a liner system, then 2 feet of dirt, fill dirt, and over the top of that be grass or some type of vegetation. They'll promote drainage of the old gyp stack south. So I think it'll go pretty smoothly once we finish with the geotextile material. And again, they're working on that right now. With regard to my role, I have 2 roles that are related but separate. I do general maintenance on the site. That means we are cutting the grass every day. We're fixing the roads. If we have a large rainfall, we'll have some erosion. We come back and fill that with dirt or sand and repair the roads so our crews can get up on the stacks. So we have regular maintenance. We also are there 24/7. So the site is always staffed. There's always somebody there. And we run water tests continuously every day to test the quality of the water in different areas within the site. The stack system has water, but each pond is different constituents. For example, the old gyp stack south is mostly seawater now, and it's been cleaned up through a process of dropping out the potassium and nitrogen. So it's relatively clean. We've taken out 99% of the harmful material there. Excuse me, I'm just trying to refer to my notes so I don't go on too much longer, leave you some time for questions. We're managing water levels through different technologies. We have the spray evaporation system. We have the piping of water to the Manatee County treatment plant. And we have another passive system where we ran 4,000 feet of 6-inch pipe around Old Gyp Stack South. We pump water into that pipe. It's perforated. It comes down onto the liner that's exposed to the sunlight. That liner can get up to 180 degrees when the sun is on it. So we're evaporating that water, which is a good, clean way to do it. And it's helped out probably about 80,000 gallons a day of disposing of water. To give you some context of how you deal with water, is that if we have 1 inch of rainfall, that's almost 4 million gallons. So when we have a rainfall, we have to play catch up. So we do all we can during the dry time of the year to get the water levels down to prepare for the next rainy season. The 3 technologies we're using will not drain the stack system. They just keep us level with the rainwater effect. It's just to provide safety so that we don't get too much water in the stack. But the volume will be such that it will never be completely gone that way. We measure water levels in the stacks by several different methods. We have a series of a transducer system. It's a type of radar that will look out over the pond to determine the level. Internally, we have piezometer systems that measure the level of water within the stack walls. They are porous and they contain water. And that gives us an idea of how the stack is behaving under different conditions of rain systems or hurricanes, or whether there's a hole in the liner. So far, we've been lucky we don't have any more separations of the liner. So we have, as I said, we have all the materials on site. We'll continue working. I believe that Forgin will be done with closing out the old Gyp Stack South March or April. I was hoping for February, but again, the delays we've had, mostly weather related and some supply chain delays in getting materials. All the materials that we bring in, except for sand and soil, are HDPE, which is manufactured with oil. So you can imagine the problems we had with oil-based products have doubled or tripled over the last year. Trucking the sand and soil in, we're talking now $5 a gallon diesel fuel. So that's doubled in the last year. So it's affected our budget. We'll probably have to go back for some more funding later on, but for now we're good and we're still moving forward.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
What are your requirements for the quality of the fill, the soil that you're bringing in? Does it have to be like good, clean fill or?
It's very clean fill. It's, I laugh because our engineers are very strict. They are required to certify compliance with the Florida Administrative Code. If that soil has too much clay in it, it will not perform correctly. It will not drain the way it should. It'll stop up the water, hold water. So they go out and they test each pile, borrow pit that we use. We have a couple developers building housing developments in the area. They are digging their ponds and we're getting soil from those areas. Thank goodness they're only a few miles away. Some of the soil we've had to reject because it's got too much clay in it. There's different layers. As they go down different layers, we go back out, we test it. Same with sand. We don't use pure sand. We use sand tailings, which has a broad constituent of sizes within the sand that comes in. It's got to be able to drain, because that's the name of the game, is getting rid of the water in a controlled manner. So the sand and soil is tested continuously as we bring in each load from a different location. So I hope that answers your question. Oh, yeah. I'm reminded that we have to prove that we're actually doing something. Here's the geotextile material that's being deployed in the Old Gyp Stack South. That material is going over just one end of the pond where there are dredge material that's soft in nature. And this material will cover that to give us a base to put sand on top. The other side of the pond doesn't need it. It's coarse material, it's hard. It will support the sand on its own. So once this is fully deployed, sand will go in, it'll be recontoured so that it will drain out to the west. And the stormwater management system is really remarkable in that it shows where the water goes in a 25-year storm, such that the water will go through a series of ditches and pipes and will be delayed up to 104 hours to fully drain. That's to keep the community safe. If we just dumped 400 acres onto the front 100 acres, probably take out a couple roads. Yeah, it's just, it's got to be controlled. It's got to happen. This is another picture of the off-road trucks delivering sand material to the top of Old Gyp Stack South. It shows them loading out the bottom there on the bottom right, or they're loading out of the sand pile. We have our trucks coming in every day, the 14,000 loads. There's 2 or 3 separate piles we work with. We have bulldozers working these piles all the time to make room for more material. And then when a hurricane comes, we put the bulldozers on top and push it out to get the altitude of that pile down so that it's not going to be affected as much by the wind that comes by. So we're constantly moving our sand and soil piles around for safety and for room. The question I get, and I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Raines, but the question is, what happens when we're done? When I get the closure letter, the court order that appointed me receiver requires me to close out the receivership, do a final accounting, and basically close the case. That means I have no more authority. I'm not permitted to do anything else, but this system will still be there. So we're going to need community involvement to figure out what we're going to do to manage this going forward. We're not going to just close it and let people come onto the property with ATVs and dirt bikes. They'll eventually get into that liner and then we get to start all over again. But I'm not going to do it. So hopefully we can get a solution. We've had some preliminary discussions with Audubon Society. I hope that it'd be a local group that we could work with to take control. We're going to have to run pumps for the next few decades because of the seepage from under the stack that will be going over to the deep injection well over a period of years. So we need somebody to run the pumps, somebody to just be there to protect the property, to do the landscape maintenance. So I'm hoping to get some ideas from the community of how we're going to do that and who could be eligible to step up and to work with us. It's got to be pretty soon because I'll be gone in probably 2.5 years. Dr. Raines?
Well, thanks for the update, guys. That was really, really, really helpful, and I hope it was helpful for you guys. The thing we want to focus on is that closure. I mean, it's getting closed. Where I don't know of a single person who's arguing to the contrary. We have funding, we have the structure in place with the receiver, so we have a partner with whom we can work, and we are moving forward relatively on schedule with a target date of December 2024. And as Herb points out, there is sort of long-term issues that we as a community still need to resolve, but we have plenty of time to do so. And in the meantime, thanks for all your hard work, and we're happy to take any questions you guys have and have time for.
Questions?
Thank you for that presentation. It was really interesting. I have a couple of questions. You went through the numbers like 14,000 loads from trucks and all that. You don't have any numbers about, I'm curious about the numbers of the cost. What's the cost since that last entity that owned it went bankrupt? What's the cost of who paid?
So I don't know the full cost since the last entity went bankrupt, but we did during the emergency response, I think it was 70-some million dollars was spent on the site. And I'll tell you, that wasn't just, that the benefits of that didn't end the day we, turned off the pumps. When we first got there, and by the way, my first day on the job was April Fool's Day 2021. I started it on top of the stack. It's all been easier since that day. But the site that I walked onto at that time does not look anything like the site today. We built a lot of resilience into that system that was not there previously. So we're still getting the benefits of that initial investment of $77 million. There's an appropriation of $100 million for the current work, which is insufficient to complete the job. So there'll be presumably another appropriation this year, and I haven't heard anything to the contrary. That's being borne currently by the state, but that's not the end game, right? The end game is to hold HRK accountable for this, and so there will be a whole parallel effort ongoing to recover the cost to the extent possible.
Well, and so you mentioned that it's going to take decades of maintenance and pumping out, and somebody's going to have to mow the landscaping or take care of it. And so when we say that 177 million so far, I mean, that's, when you say the state, that's the state taxpayers, right? And so I go back to kind of those first slides. I'd like to know, if other states have this or if our state has it. When you have a private company that deals with toxic chemicals and materials or building practices or whatever, it seems to me it would make sense to have them pay into a fund that is like an environmental protection or environmental impact fund. If you're dealing with these chemicals and things, and if you deal with them, if you're operating with them right next to our waterway or in a major metropolitan area, you pay more money into this fund. And this fund is for emergency response, just like this, where these guys go bankrupt. Because do we have anything like that right now?
So I appreciate the question. It's a very, very good one. And so for perspective, of course, in the mid 1960s, when this facility was first constructed, there were not what we would call financial assurance requirements that would apply in a case like this. The department in the early 90s had its initial financial assurance requirements that were for these types of facilities. And then those were strengthened in some rulemaking that was done in the 2005 timeframe. And so we have strong financial assurance requirements that apply to these types of facilities. That work that was done in 2005 was, of course, done on the heels of the Mulberry Corporation bankruptcy. So we took that information, learned what happened, and the direction at the time was to do everything we could to strengthen the financial assurance requirements that apply. And so that does provide significant protections that for, financially, if a company is not able to do, what happened in 2001 with the Mulberry Corporation, obviously left a huge legacy. The particular circumstances of this site have complicated matters and made, the closure work that's being done today more complicated. But the requirements that the department has for financial insurance are there, and they were strengthened in 2005, and that was an important step in the right direction.
So the balance that we have in the state, is it going to help cover this 177 million plus? Is it pretty flush? So I'm thinking that that's a fund that's not taxpayer funded. That's industry funded. So, you know what I mean? It's okay if we've got money up in the state as long as it came from those corporations that are dealing with toxic chemicals.
So to be clear, the requirements that are there today apply to the companies that operate, and the company that was there, the Mulberry Corporation, is not, was not subject to those prior requirements and didn't have the resources to provide for funds either in third-party protection mechanisms like a surety bond or other requirements that are required today. So the Mulberry Corporation, unfortunately, did not have sufficient resources, when they went bankrupt in 2001, and that's why the requirements were strengthened. So there are no mechanisms that go back to the particular bankruptcy of the Mulberry Corporation. So that is unfortunate. What I think the good news here today is that the leadership of the state and Manatee County everybody has stepped up to take care of this issue. It is expensive. It is expensive, but it does need to be done. It needs to be completed and make this so that there aren't, nobody wants to be back here 5 years, 10 years from now, worried about this site. And so we're all committed to making sure that's done. And, if we could have gone back to the mid 60s and foreseen where this would have gone, I'm sure everybody would certainly want to have done things differently. But today we're focused on just getting this closure done and making sure that going forward, we don't have these kind of problems in the future.
Not to be the devil, one more thing, just because I'm part of the Suncoast League of Cities, and so we all care about the environment and can talk to our legislators. And so I'd like some assurance or understanding, is that environmental protection fund that you're saying we do have at the state level, is it adequately funded? And if it's not, do we need to push our legislators to require more funding in that? You know what I mean?
So I think, I want to be, so the requirements there, there is a series of requirements, and we could certainly take some time and sit down and go through them. They're not just a single state. There's not a state fund, but there are requirements that require, in some cases, there are funds that are held in trusts that would pay for if there was a future concern. And so there is a number of requirements, and there's both state and federal requirements that apply in this case today in Florida. And so I would be happy to take time separately and sit down and kind of go through those and review those. I am very proud of the work we have done to get in place what's there. I feel that what's in place is important and needed to protect, against this kind of thing happening in the future. And so we'd be happy to take some time and talk through that and review that, in detail.
And I'd add to that the mining community is a little simpler today than it used to be. There used to be dozens upon dozens of different mining companies, Mulberry being just one of them. But today it's mostly Mosaic. So we're dealing with fewer stakeholders, and Mosaic's pretty robust and has, yeah, I think it's more easily conceivable that yes, the answer is yes, we do have the proper assurances in place because we're only dealing with a small number of mining companies who are backed by a pretty robust business plan.
Further questions? I just had one. It was the long-term looking down the road. And you talked about sealing and diverting. And what is the long-term thought that this property could be used for in the future?
So actually, I'm going to bring Herb back up because I want him to say something. I hope he's going to say it. I'm going to say it for him because he's been asked that question. Well, you know, during closure, can you prep it for ball fields or whatnot? And his answer has been pretty consistently, I'm here to close it. There's lots of decisions that need to be made about what happens next, but that's not what we're actually working on. The work right now is really focused on getting it to that closure. And if somebody wants to turn it into ball field someday or whatever else, more power to you. But right now the focus is really on getting to a point where it's clean stormwater only that's coming off that site for the foreseeable future.
It pops into my head because we have a 200-acre site in Pinellas County that was closed decades ago, and they put a sealer on it and they put grass over it, and we pay $1 million a year now to drain it and mow it, and, you know, and we don't know. We have no idea how much it would cost to return to Virgin Earth. And I mean, we're hundreds of millions of dollars. And I have no clue if we had done it 30 years ago, it would have been $50 million. And it would have been, you know, so I'm just curious about the thought process of, could we spend $50 more million today and get it to a better site? And you know, I'm not talking about a stadium for the Rays, but just any kind of, you know, natural use, or, because right now we have a 200-acre place where people fly model airplanes over. That's really the only use that property gets, you know. So that was where my thought, you know, and I understand the mission that you have. I was just curious if that thought had been in conversation.
Yeah, I think one of the constraints here, and I think either John or Herb mentioned it, is there's still water inside that stack, and there's going to be continuing to be water inside that stack for the foreseeable future. That needs to be managed, and there's no shortcut to that. If there was, we'd already taken it. So right now we're really just focused on making sure that any new water that enters the site comes off as clean stormwater. So we can stop accumulating that water and getting it into the system that is the unclean water, and, you know, continuing to sort of, as Herb said, I mean, right now we're just sort of balancing out. Rain falls in, we evaporate some out, we pump some out, more rainfall comes in, and we're just holding steady. And we're trying to get to the point where we get the processed water completely off-site, the salt water completely off-site, and the only new water coming off that site is stormwater, and the limited water that's still in the stack that we'll have to process and manage into the future.
And I think, Dr. Raines, if I could, I mean, so one thing that I think is really important as you think about that future at the site, one of the biggest aspects is, and everything is sort of listed here, the water management during long-term care. So when you go past, when Herb completes the closure, and when that site is just shedding clean stormwater, then you have the ongoing seepage, the drainage that's managed to protect groundwater around, you know, and at the site. That water for the long-term care water management is part of the agreement that Manatee County leadership and Herb negotiated. And that provides a framework to take care of what I think the department recognizes is the biggest piece of that long-term care period, is the ongoing water management. And so I'm very pleased that they spent the time to think through, that was a complicated discussion. They spent the time to think through those logistics and incorporate that into what Herb is doing today, what the court-appointed receiver is doing today. So I commend Mr. Donica and Manatee County for that extra effort to begin to chip away and work collectively in the community here to figure out how are we going to take care of the post-closure period for this site. So that's a big piece of it. And then, you know, the environmental monitoring and the landscape maintenance and the maintenance of a couple of pumps that will need to be at that site to manage the seepage. those are things that I know are very important to the receiver. Part of his task is indeed to help lay the groundwork for what will come next. Yeah.
And to that end, I mean, we need the community involvement in that, right? I mean, this isn't a decision that the DEP is going to make or Herb's going to make or whatnot. This is a decision we all get to make. How are we going to use this site moving forward? All we can do is help you get there.
So how is that happening? Are there like facilitated community conversations or like, and who's in charge of that? Or I've heard you all say it's important that it reflects like the community's desire for what's appropriate to that. They're like, how are we getting that information?
So the model for hosting and facilitating those kind of public input processes are very important. And we don't have those details today. But we recognize, I think everybody recognizes, I know Mr. Donica is very focused on the task at hand, but he's also strategically thinking about, how do I get a plan that has community input? And so those are the kind of things. And I think it will candidly be return visits here to this forum to discuss and to hear input. Today, it is focused on continuing to get the closure going, to find every opportunity to keep that closure expedited, but as Mr. Donica said, to make sure it's done right. I think that is important, and it doesn't leave anything that would be subject to hurricane concerns, in the future, for example. So we have, a couple of years where that discussion will have to unfold, and I appreciate everybody here sort of recognizing that, 2 years will go by quickly, and those discussions do need to go forward.
And there, by the way, is how you can get a hold of any one of us. If you'd like to get involved, if you'd like to give us your great idea about how we could, better engage the community moving forward. There's my email address, Mr. Coates, Mr. Donica's email addresses, and happy to take your feedback now or at any time. And again, we're happy. We've talked about this with Ed in the past. Like, we're happy to come back. If you guys would like quarterly updates or an update every 6 months or at sort of key junctures, just let us know and we'll be back.
Mr. Sherwood? Yeah, and trying to link what I've heard in terms of our board's conversation back to you all, and definitely appreciate for Mark and John, you all presenting the current status and for the next couple of years of closure activities. And I think it's of the community's mind, closure of the facility, removing the 500 million gallons of wastewater that still remains on site is paramount. Eliminating that from the site is job number one. The longer term closure and who's responsible for that is something that we need to continue to have dialogue on, because as Herb mentioned, 2-3 years down the road where the receiver's work is done in terms of managing the wastewater that's on site. The ongoing activities of eliminating that stormwater, which still will have a load to the bay, which will still have a nitrogen load allocation through the nitrogen management consortium, needs to be managed effectively for the bay's overall health. And certainly over the past couple of years, these sorts of events have, in our minds, affected the bay's health and the conditions seagrass resources in and around the Tampa Bay area. With that in mind, and kind of linking to what Councilmember Beckman said, there has to be a mechanism, if there is not one already, that the state needs to consider to fund those long-term management costs of this site. Whether or not we can tap into trust fund resources right now, that's a policy decision, right? So if it's going to cost $1 million+ per year, as Mr. Justice alluded to, for another site that's managed by Pinellas County, we have to take that into account in terms of full and final closure dealing with this site, which goes beyond that 2 to 3 year period. So I would encourage our policy board to continue to have these discussions as we move forward in terms of that long-term maintenance of the site, because it is going to be an ongoing nutrient load that we have to manage for the bay's benefit. And we need to find the resources to manage that collectively, if not from the taxpayer-funded appropriations to the state, to another mechanism, to the severance funds that are managed for these funding activities. That's something that I want to continue to have dialogue with this board about, but there is no, after that 2-3 year period dealing with wastewater, there's no one stepping up to the plate right now to fully manage that site. And we need to work together to find a solution for long-term. I'll stop there, but wanted to sort of tie everything I heard in response to the presentation.
Very good. Mr. Donovan, Mr. Code. I'm sorry, Councilman.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I just didn't hear a whole lot of talk about the deep water injection well. Can you give us, where is it? When's it going to be operational? And in the report, it talks about we have a capacity of 1 million gallons a day to drain. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. So just to provide some background, I guess, on the well, there's really 2 components that are important: the construction of the well itself and the environmental monitoring, that goes with the well. There's an additional monitoring well, dual zone monitoring well, for making sure that it's being properly operated and maintained, and that the injection process is being protective as expected. So that particular work, Manatee County's contractors are, as I understand, very much on schedule, and we'll be completing that, on or about the end of this year, which is, surprisingly, today is December 2nd, so it's apparently here. So that work is going very well. They are also working very well on a pretreatment facility that will manage the water that comes from the Piney Point site. And on that particular process, it's like any other construction process that, Manatee County is working through the timing of availability. Their contractors working the timing and availability of resources. And they are doing everything in their power to get that done before the upcoming rainy season. And so I think none of us here today can guarantee exactly when that pretreatment facility will be up and available for operation, but I'm confident that the partners that are out there with the county and working with Herb are planning, for that, and communicating in terms of, when exactly the particular equipment and infrastructure that they need for that pretreatment facility will be available to be installed. Because I think we all want that site to be both moving forward. It is 1 million gallons a day is the expected capacity for operation, for normal operation of that combined facility with the pretreatment facility plus the deep well injection process. And so when you think about it, the 500 or so million gallons plus additional rainfall that falls in those compartments is what will have to be managed down those wells. And they're also working and looking at the sequencing and seeing what opportunities there are to be able to possibly move water sooner, as long as it's properly managed, meets the specifications to protect the deep well injection process, to make sure that our water resources are protected. So there's a lot of parts and moving pieces, but the expectation is to kind of land it is that before this next rainy season, want to have that system up and operating, if at all possible. And that's the expectation. And I appreciate all the hard work that folks are putting into that from the department's perspective. Thank you.
So that pretreatment facility on one of these in the backup material, there's a Allied New Technologies plant. Is that the pretreatment facility?
So I'm not fully aware of the details, but I am aware from just discussions that the Allied Universal is a bleach plant, electrochemical bleach plant that is located on a purchased portion of the former Piney Point site. And my understanding is that they have arrangements they have worked out with Manatee County. It is not for the facility, the deep well that Piney Point site itself would use. It's for a separate deep injection facility at their Buffalo Creek, which is their North Regional Water Reclamation Facility. And the material, as I understand it, is a clean, salty brine that is a byproduct of the bleach manufacturing process. So everybody who uses bleach in your pools or for cleaning or whatever, stuff like that, the newer processes and electrochemical bleach manufacturing process produces a fairly clean, as a way to manufacture bleach. It's a very modern technology, but it does produce a salty brine. And it's my understanding that they are making arrangements for that material at some point to be injected in the Buffalo Creek facility. It is not the same deep well that would handle the Piney Point wastewater.
For that. And then, just wanted to just follow up on something Mr. Donica mentioned about the future use of the land. And I just wanted to double check it, the whole area is secure, isn't it? There's fence around it. The public doesn't have any access to this facility.
The site, the site has access roads that are gated and fenced. There are certain portions of the site that, for example, are adjacent to the Williams Gas facility, and there is a fence there, but it is, I'm sure that, anybody could, I'm sure, go through something like that, but the site is, monitored and maintained, 24/7. The staff who work there make rounds at the site to make sure that it's safe and there are no concerns with operation. I think the biggest thing that folks have to worry about is there's plenty of alligators, in this part of the state, and of course they get through whatever fences are there. So yeah, I appreciate what the receiver is doing to, maintain and monitor the site 24/7.
Thank you. Thank you for the update.
Anything further?
I'd like to say something.
Yes, sir.
I want to thank the gentlemen for their very detailed presentation. What a saga Piney Point was and it is, but I'm glad that we're looking forward to writing the final chapter on this. A lot of entities involved have been involved in this. It's been a very complicated matter, but a lot of hard work has been put into it. As Mr. Sherwood said, there's still a lot more work to be done in regards to dialogue and discussion, but I'm just glad that we're heading into the right direction and with more constructive dialogue, I'm sure we'll get somewhere finally close to done and its ultimate closure, which is what we're looking forward to. It's a very complicated saga, but we are looking forward to its ultimate closure and seeing what we can do with that facility. It's a very large facility, a lot of land. So once we get to that stage, I'm sure we'll have something good for that land. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Donovan, Mr. Coates, really appreciate your time today. And Dr. Raines, really appreciate how accessible you've been throughout this entire process, online and in person today. Really appreciate having you there and the work you're doing. So again, thank you all for everything you're doing for Great Region.
Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to our agenda, action items. Item number 5, quarterly financial report and final 22 program life budget.
Now, page 10 of your agenda is our quarterly report for the period ending September 30th, 2022, which is also our final programmatic budget for fiscal year 2022. This budget will be delivered to our auditors, be subject to audit for our final budget numbers for this prior fiscal year. So just a couple things to note in terms of activity. We're about 77% of our anticipated activity in terms of total revenues, so coming in at about a total of 2.7 million. Various sources of federal and contracted revenues to support the majority of our work in terms of restoration activities and research of the program. It also had a significant amount of conference revenues and contributions and donations this year, much more so in the past, and that was related to the Basis 7 conference that occurred in March, but also just through raising the awareness of the community and the work that we're doing, and the donations that we received to support some of our mini grant and other environmental restoration fund grant programs. So on the expense side, one of the things that I would like to note, we were a little bit over in terms of 4 expense categories. We're anticipating increases in our board liability insurance, and that's reflected in a slight increase from what we budgeted in our mid-year budget amendment. A little bit higher in terms of our capital outlays. It was purchase additional equipment for new staff that we're bringing on board. And I mentioned that at the last board meeting. Printing costs were a little bit higher in terms of printing out additional materials for reporting on our state of the bay report. And then other expenses, that's where we covered a lot of our sponsored conference costs. About $72,000 of that expense was related to the Basis 7 and our 30th year celebrations that occurred last November. So a little bit higher in terms of those particular expense categories, but it's been more than absorbed on other expense categories where we came in slightly lower. In total, our total expenses for the fiscal year 2022 were a little bit over $2.5 million, which leave our fund balance at anticipated level of about $2.6 million. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have on this final budget and quarter 4 report for fiscal year 2022.
Questions? Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show it passes unanimously. Item number 6, estuary alliance and legislative priorities.
This is on page 11 of your packet, and this is something we also bring at this November or December board meeting, I should say, due to postponement. But this is basically outlining our upcoming legislative priorities that I will relay to our local delegation, both at the state and federal level. So on the top part, the bullets related to some of our talking points for Florida legislative delegates relate to our ongoing activities to support your all's work in improving wastewater and stormwater infrastructure throughout Tampa Bay. So any additional resources to address those ongoing nutrient loads stemming from those particular sources, we're continuing to ask for both state and federal support on those fronts. The one thing I just want to mention and highlight in bold there is, really raising awareness on the old Tampa Bay segment where we've had consistently poor water quality conditions and a significant loss of seagrasses. There's a variety of issues that we're trying to combat through our estuary program resources, to our appropriations as the National Estuary Program, as well as additional grant funding that we're bringing into the program, but really trying to address the water quality issues from both a nutrient load reduction standpoint, as well as improving tidal circulation from some of the creeks that enter Tampa Bay, and in particular working on ways that we could enhance tidal circulation through additional causeway alterations on some of the bridges that expand that link to Tampa Bay and St. Petersburg area. So, those highlights are basically what we were bringing and educating our local delegation on, and will further require additional resources to fully combat some of the water quality issues that we're facing, particularly in the old Tampa Bay segment. On the federal side, we have garnered significant congressional support as one of 28 national estuary programs. I think there's a appropriation bill moving through right now that sets our funding for next year at $800,000 level. That's $25,000 more for this upcoming fiscal year. So we continue to have bipartisan congressional support for the National Estuary Program. We continue to want to educate on all the good work that is being done locally in the Tampa Bay area and amplified through the other 27 National Estuary Programs throughout the country. And certainly some of the work that Commissioner White, former Oakland County DOCC representative on our policy board, has moved forward in terms of seeking a wild and scenic river designation for the Little Manatee River. That resolution passed the House and it's in the Senate currently. If there's no action during this congressional legislative session, then we'll be going back to the drawing board. We certainly don't want that initiative to be dropped in the future. We think that's a highly valued thing we could propel in our region, to have a wild and scenic river, namely the Little Manatee River, as a part of the Tampa Bay watershed. So that's basically some general highlights. Again, this is something I bring to the board every November, just so that you're aware of sort of the priorities we're relaying to the elected officials, both at the state and federal level. And as your individual entities develop potential proposals for funding sources through either the state or through federal resources, we can coordination of those activities that relates to these priorities as well as implementation of our comprehensive plan. With that, I'll entertain any other additional comments or considerations that aren't listed here. We'd love to have your board feedback on these priorities, and I look forward to working with you all to sort of advocate on from the National SU program, Tampa Bay SU program in particular, for these initiatives within our region.
Very good. Questions, comments, discussion? Or motion to approve? Second. We have a motion and a second. Further discussion on this outstanding list of priorities? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. Item number 7, grants.
So in your packet on page 12 and 13, you'll see a table outlining the 2022 Bay Mini Grant projects and their recommended budgets. And those also have links to the full grant applications and a summary of each of the grants received. So just for those of you who are new, Bay Mini grants are competitive cash awards that are offered to community organizations with projects that address education and restoration priorities in Tampa Bay. And this grant program is entirely funded by our Tarp and Tag specialty license plate. So Bay Mini grant requests for proposals were sent to email lists, prior grant awardees, as well as other interested parties beginning in July. And we received a total of 26 applications, totaling over $116,000. We had 5 community advisory committee members volunteer to serve on the Bay Mini Grant Review Committee. And these judges scored the applications based on the strength of the proposal, the ability of the applicant to complete the project, as well as cost justification. So in addition, we also gave priority to cost-effective projects that support the prevention, eradication, or management of invasive species in the Tampa Bay watershed. So Ed finalized the recommended project list for board consideration, taking into account the restoration and education priorities for the Bay Mini grants, as well as the findings from the judging committee. So in total, 23 projects are recommended for full or partial funding, for a total funding request of $99,511.28. And with that, I'll open it to any questions.
Questions on the list? Great. Yeah, Councilman.
I didn't have a question, but I've been on the like 5th item down, the Copper Pot Bayou water lines issue with the invasive tree and vegetation removal. It's been a project that I've been working on for a long time, so I was glad to see that funded. It's a big issue that's causing repetitive flooding in US 20. That's and now move forward.
Great motions.
Just to clarify, that's actually one that is not recommended.
This one's not.
Yeah, if you look on the amount requested is in second from the left, or right, and then the final column.
We talked with that group, and there were some shortcomings in terms of the proposal they submitted, but we're definitely wanting them to resubmit for this work.
Well, so this is in a neighborhood in my city council district, and I will ask them to resubmit.
Yeah, we over the years, we have a lot of groups that will, the first time they apply, for whatever reason, doesn't necessarily, get the committee's approval, and then they come back the second year after working with staff and get fully funded. So hopefully that will be the case here. You still move approval? Just making sure. We have a motion, do we have a second? And we have a motion and a second, further discussion. I want to thank the staff and the committee for reviewing. There's a diversity of types of projects on here and a diversity of geography throughout the whole estuary site, so I appreciate that as well. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. Item 7.1, the grant agreements from the National Science Foundation and Restore Act. Mr. Sherwood.
So this is a new agenda item that originally in my executive director report, but we received some additional information since the board announcement went out. Just wanted to bring to the board's attention that we've been fairly active in terms of acquiring new grants for the program. The first one I'll mention is the National Science Foundation Convergence Accelerator Grant that Maya Burke's been working on with University of South Florida, as well as University of Iowa, U.S. Virgin Island reps, and folks locally in terms of empowering local organizations to really address nutrient pollution. So they're developing a curriculum and an online platform that will hopefully engage with those communities a whole lot more effectively. So we're expecting about $200,000 to support some salary and travel costs, as well as contractual support for that grant project. The second source of funding we're anticipating, and this was just released right before Thanksgiving, the DEP Restore Funded Priorities 3D list has a project that we submitted a proposal to the state back in July on. And this was really looking at ways we could develop nutrient load reduction projects focused on stormwater controls, particularly in the whole Tampa Bay region, but throughout the Tampa Bay watershed as well. We originally supported submitted a proposal with the ask of about $13.5 million. We are fortunate to receive notice that in the draft list that was developed by the state, they're looking to fund that project at the tune of $9.5 million. Again, this is the draft list that still needs to be approved by the Restore Council, so this money is not yet guaranteed, but I wanted to bring this to the board's attention because it would significantly impact our budget moving forward in the work that we anticipate. So again, that project is focused on developing multi-jurisdictional stormwater master plan in the whole Tampa Bay watershed, and then actually implementing the projects that might come out of that master plan development, as well as other partner initiatives that would be worthy of those stormwater retrofits that would support either resiliency or nutrient load reduction efforts in the Tampa Bay and larger Tampa Bay region. So this is some great news for additional Restore funding. The timing of that funding, we would have to negotiate contract with DEP after it's approved through the Restore Council. And we will probably won't receive that money until October or later of next year to start that work. And it's that Convergence Accelerator Grant that Maya's working on. Is actually, we have a draft sub-award agreement right now from USF, awaiting the board's approval for me to accept and execute those grant agreements. So we're bringing this to the board's attention just because of the significant amount of funds that may come through the program, and would entertain any questions you might have about this project. Yes, ma'am.
Do you want us, is it appropriate for us as different municipalities or entities to write letters of support for that funding? Or is it the state funding, the draft that's $9,500,000? Or is it pretty much coming? We don't need to write letters?
Certainly, the Restore Council members would probably love to hear the support for those projects as they deliver and finalize the list.
Okay, so can you provide a draft or a talking point and give us a timeline of when to submit it?
Yeah, it'd probably be over the next couple of months.
Okay.
I think the public comment window is currently open, so I'll provide that link in the key actions memo too.
Okay.
Very good. I'm no expert, but $9.5 million sounds like a pretty good deal to me. And this is, remind us where this money all from way back when did this come from?
This is from Deepwater Horizon oil spill funding. It's actually bucket 2 funds that go to Restore Council, and then the states develop their list that are submitted to the council through the council. We actually received some funding back in, I think, officially in 2012, and then we finalized an agreement in 2015 for the resources on 5 projects that are currently being pursued within the watershed right now.
And if this is successful as it's projected now, will we have access to that $8 million pretty immediately?
So after we go through the environmental compliance steps, yes.
Yeah. Some of this money, I mean, from the 2010, right? It was 2010. Was like, you're going to get X million dollars, but you're going to get $1 a month for the rest of your life. And so, you know, which is great, we'll take it, but having infusion of life, infusion of cash is really how you get some of these things done. All good news. Further questions or comments on this item? Or is there a motion to authorize the executive director as outlined in your agenda item. We have a motion? Second? Further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. Wonderful. Item 8, Executive Director of Staff Reports.
So just a couple of brief updates to bring to the board's attention. Some somber news. I don't know if everyone has heard, but our Water Management District Governing Board appointee, Dr. William Colgar, actually passed away earlier in November. He has been a long-standing, bright star for the marine science community, both here and nationally, and his work through FIO, USF, and through NOAA, National Marine Fisheries, can't be surpassed. And his legacy is definitely one that will leave a mark on the community. I believe there's some memorial donation funds that have been set up through USF that will fund the scholarship in his honor. So we can also put that in the key actions if there's an interest to make a donation to the Disney Memorial Fund. I just want to bring that to your all's attention if you did not hear.
Councilmember and I were talking about it this morning, and he's one of those under the radar, unless you're in the area. If you're in that area, you know him. But out in the community, I don't think people have a clue how impactful he was on all the things that we care about in this room. And then I was at the University of South Florida, St. Pete, when he was interim chancellor. At the same time, he was still doing all his other duties. And I was dealing with leadership programs with students, and the students just fell in love with him. He absolutely charmed them, and they charmed him, and it was an incredible relationship that we had while he was the interim chancellor there. So a lot of folks are going to miss him personally, and then of course the incredible impact that he had.
Thank you. On a lighter note, some staffing updates, and this is something that we've been sort of bringing to the board's attention over the past couple of meetings. I did want to introduce Ms. Carrie Flaherty Walia, who joined our program back in September as the restoration ecologist. She comes by way of Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, with taking over a lot of responsibility of managing our restoration projects and the habitat restoration sort of into our program. Carrie, I wanted to say a couple words to say hi.
Sure, I'll just say hi. I'm really glad to be here. As Ed mentioned, I spent most of my career with Florida Fish and Wildlife, doing fisheries ecology work and habitat research. So I'm really excited to kind of join the estuary programming team and really make some impactful, do some impactful work.
Welcome, Karen. We appreciate you being here.
And just to bring to the board's attention, this isn't my entire staff. So this is currently.
There's more.
But we are looking to hire a new administrative specialist position. A new person coming aboard in December 12th. That's Spratlin Kern. She'll be helping out with a lot of the grant administration and some of the new funding resources and all the projects that we're currently managing. We should our staffing internally a little bit more to manage all the grant programs. Also bringing aboard a new environmental social scientist, Dr. Blake Simmons, going to be joining our program in early January. He comes by way of Colorado State University, and we're really looking forward to his work in developing the human dimensions and some community engagement that our work is important to contribute towards in the region, and really trying to branch out into groups that we don't typically serve right now very well, and expanding into serve from communities throughout the watershed on some work activities. So really excited on bringing those folks aboard. They'll bring us to a staff of 9, and I think we'll still have a significant amount of workload, but it'll be better managed with a little bit more warm blood into the program. So definitely looking forward to that. Also wanted to bring to the board's attention, we did submit a work plan to EPA based on prior board recommendations on 2 restoration themes using the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. that is coming to us as a national upgrade program over the next 5 years. If you recall, about 909,000 per year to the tune of a total of about 4.5 million to support implementation of our CCMP towards the restoration activities that I outlined in our legislative priorities, as well as some other work that we've been mentioning. Our initial proposal was for the first 2 years of funding from those resources, so about 1.8 million directed towards 4 Tidal Creek restoration projects, targeting the Jones Creek watershed, Little Bayou Creek, Gap Creek, and Archie Creek. And those are 2 creeks in Pinellas County, one in Hillsborough, and another in Manatee County. Those projects will be funded at the tune of about $454,900 per project. So, as I mentioned, that it encumbers the first 2 years of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. We still have about 2.7 million for the final 3 years, for years 2024 through 2026. We'll continue to solicit project concepts for the use of those funds in those future years. We have to develop an equity strategy and deliver that to EPA by June of 2023, which would further outline sort of our strategy for utilizing those funds and directing those resources towards worthy restoration projects within the watershed.
Ed, can I just say
Yeah.
that the equity strategy is used to waive the requirements for local match to those federal dollars. So if the board chooses to approach this funding source in a different kind of manner, we would still be able to bring those resources down to the local watershed. We would just be required to provide local match for those funds in order to do that. So the equity strategy is a way to remove a requirement for a local match, but we still have flexibility to make decisions to approach it differently should we decide to.
Yeah, just to bring to some of the new board members' attention, there's 2 restoration themes that are originally approved back in May by the board. The first restoration theme was looking at pursuing Tidal Creek restoration projects that have both a nutrient load reduction benefit as well as a resiliency benefit to underserved communities. And the second restoration theme was to address sort of aging infrastructure issues that all our municipalities are facing within the watershed. And those were sort of the 2 sort of overall programmatic concepts that we solicited ideas from each of the municipalities over this past year for this initial submittal. So we again are asking for any projects that you have in the queue that need additional funding resources to fully implement. And this is a source of funding that we can direct towards those, whether or not it's under those 2 restoration themes or any other board approved theme moving forward. Again, as Mike mentioned, we have some flexibility in that consideration. And again, we'll be developing another work plan for the use of the $2.7 million for the final 3 years of funding over the course of the next year through this work. Any other questions on that? Kind of the last point that I want to make is kind of skipping over the miscellaneous grant funds. We made that action item. We will be advertising for the 2023 Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. This is a larger grant fund that we administer, co-administer with Restore America's Estuaries. We have initially earmarked about $700,000 in funding for that environmental restoration fund, but in adding in these potential bipartisan infrastructure law funds, there's significantly more depending on the project concepts that are submitted to what we call TBER. So the board also requested that we kind of bring back priorities we're thinking about for the use of that environmental restoration fund grants. Again, the points that are highlighted on the bottom page 14 and into the top page 15 align with a lot of the things that we just mentioned, the restoration themes that we're supporting, wanting to support through the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, as well as the legislative priorities that I outlined earlier that you all approved. Again, focusing on aging wastewater infrastructure issues, stormwater loads to the bay, which is the primary nutrient load delivery to the bay right now. Continue to want to support projects that will reduce the burden of nutrient loads emanating from stormwater sources. So those project concepts are high, particularly in the Old Tampa Bay watershed is a key area where we'd like to see more of those projects implemented. And then, the three final priorities for that fund we're looking at is supporting additional tidal creek restoration, as well as non-coastal native upland habitats throughout the watershed. Last priority, just to mention, is trying to enhance science literacy, any projects that will come in for that restoration fund that would further engage the community, really speak to sort of the core issues that we're trying to work on through the SRA program, would also be considered for Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund as well. We wanted to bring that to the board's attention because that was an ask of prior board meetings, but that's what we're anticipating as sort of ones that we would judge the proposal that is coming for this upcoming 2023 concept. Stop there. I don't know, Maya, is there any other announcements that we need to make about that? Is it? Yeah.
I have a question. Would you consider Hillsborough River part of the program? If we had projects in the river, would that be considered?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, the entire Tampa Bay watershed would qualify for TBRIC funds. That was it for the report.
All right. Additional packet information, you've got the quarterly progress reports. Anything else to share besides that, Maya? What's in your packets?
There's quite a bit of information in the technical advisory committee and community advisory committee reports. I encourage you to take a look. Everything is linked if you want to dive deeper. Quite a bit of media coverage continues, which I think is great news and pointing to some continued success in terms of our outreach to the community. And then we have the proposed meeting dates for 2023, the last page in the packet. I'm just hoping that you all can take a look at those, and if you have any conflicts in advance, you can let me know. I'd appreciate it, but I'll send out calendar invites shortly.
Very good. And for those that are new, it's a continual goal of this board, this organization, to have that open science concept, to be sharing the information that you have with the world. So I appreciate that being included as a highlight. All right. Anything else?
The only other thing to mention, at our next February board meeting, we will need to do both chair and vice chair nominations and elections. But coming into that period, and with Commissioner White leading the board, we'll need to fill the vice chair position for the program. So there'll be an agenda item at the February board. All right.
Very good. Really appreciate your accommodating change in the meeting. We had to move it from the hurricane postponement date because a lot of meetings canceled that day. We appreciate your all's flexibility for being here today, and especially all the alternates that were here repping your organization. We appreciate that as well. Anything else for the good of the order?
Just like real quick, I just want to introduce myself. Sorry I was late. I was walking around Lockheed Martin for 30 minutes, so I won't be late again. I was here, but I'm representing District 4. Stacy White's my predecessor. He was an absolute rock star with this group. I'm not going to pretend to be like him, but I do talk to him about 2 or 3 times a day. He's my mentor, someone that I really, really look up to. I'm also going to be serving on the board in Hillsborough River local. So I look forward just really to learning from you folks, because I think that will have a little learning curve, but hopefully I learn a lot and I can bring that back for board policy and county commission. So thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate you being here. Welcome. So you've got the equipment to be on the Hillsborough rep?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. All right, excellent. I apologize, I didn't acknowledge that being. All right, have a wonderful holiday season. Appreciate it. We are adjourned.